In this video, I'm going to talk about why I rarely use subtractive EQ when it comes to mixing. There's so much stuff all over the internet, whether it's on videos, blogs, whatever, saying you should only ever use subtractive EQ and boosting frequencies is harming your mix. And I want to talk about why most of that information is completely rubbish and you shouldn't listen to it. Now, before we dive into it, I want to preface all of this by saying, ultimately, if your song and your mix sounds great, none of this matters. The main thing, the end goal that we all have is creating incredible sounding music. And no one cares how you got there. Whether it's through boosting EQs, subtractive EQs, it doesn't matter. I just want to talk about my philosophy when it comes to creating music. Now this spirals back to a video I put out a couple of weeks ago talking about getting sounds right in the production and in the recording phase. Making decisions early and not putting it off until the mix stage or the mastering stage. When I'm producing and recording a song, I will get the best sound that we possibly can at source. So if we're recording vocals and the singer is really sibilant and it's just really harsh and the S's are poking out, then we'll stop, we'll switch the microphone to a darker one. If we're recording drums and the cymbals are really bright and really washed out, then we'll change the cymbals or we'll use some different overhead mics. If we need to record with compression or EQ, then we'll do that on the way in to get the sound right. And in my opinion, this always results in a better sound at the end of it. Because when you're mixing tracks that already sound great, your main focus is just on making the mix pop, making it really engaging for the listener and not taking part in damage control and trying to make sense of everything that you just kind of recorded and now have to deal with. Now, why is this relevant to not using subtractive EQ? Well, personally, I will only use subtractive EQ in a mix when I need to deal with a problem. If I've got a vocal and there is a really harsh resonance, a whistle tone, then you're going to have to get in with a surgical EQ and notch that out, or use some dynamic EQ to tame it. Let's bring up the toms. These are a great example. Toms always suffer from that boxy cardboard frequency around 500 hertz. So I will go in and we'll duck it out. You can see 500 hertz, we're taking all of that out. That's because we don't like that particular sound in the toms. Now, sometimes this is unavoidable and you're going to have to do that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. However, the rest of the tracks, if they were recorded well with a great microphone, a great player, then it's just a case of enhancing them in the mix. And the reason that I don't use subtractive EQ here is because I will use EQs in the mix based on their specific characteristics. Very often I'm using EQs that are modeled on old vintage analog EQs such as SSL, Neve, API, Pultex, etc. Boosting 5K on an SSL sounds very different to boosting 5K on a Neve or an API or a Pultec. And so I will choose the EQ that sounds best on a particular source. Now, again, to preface this, if you are using a purely digital EQ like the stock ones that come with Cubase, Logic, Pro Tools, this doesn't matter because there is no saturation. They don't have those characteristics that the analogs have. So if you take a digital EQ, you boost the top and the bottom, then there is an argument to say you'd be better off just cutting the mids, because by cutting, you're not introducing any extra noise, any extra sound or any phase stuff. However, with the analog modeled EQs, there is some tone to be had with these. And in my opinion, you get more of that flavor and more of that tone when you are boosting them. So let's have a look at some examples. Let's start with the overheads. So these are what the overheads sound like, just plain recorded. Let's take a listen. Nothing wrong with that. They sound great. However, they're too dark. We need to brighten them up so that they really pop out of the mix. So let's go for some EQ from Neve. We've also got this here. I love this. I think it's modeled off like Pultec curves. Just adding top and bottom. We've got some 4K on the Neve and a big chunk of 60 on the Neve as well, and a filter at 50. Let's put that in. And without. And back in. That Neve really helps to bring out the low end, and the cymbals just now have a sheen over them. It sounds great. If we'd have just taken a digital EQ and just ducked some mids out of it, it would not sound like that, because the Neve is adding its own characteristic to the sound. Let's take a look at the snare. So this is the main snare that we recorded with the kit. That sounds okay, but it's too dark. This is a really big pop rock song, and we need it to poke through. So we're going to put some tape saturation on it just to help with the low end. And then let's EQ. We're adding a ton of 5K. We're adding a ton of bottom. Again, we're using this lift EQ from Slate to add 8 dB of top and 10 dB of bottom. Even more in the SSL. I love the SSL because it has point and it has poke. That's the reason that I would choose the SSL rather than the Neve, because the SSL, I feel, just keeps some extra transient from the snare. So let's put that in now. And out. That's a world of difference. You can hear the extra attack. Some of that will be coming from the compression, absolutely. But a lot of it is coming from this 5K boost on the SSL. Let's have a look at guitars. So here we have a pair of heavy, distorted guitars that are playing rhythm in the chorus. Let's listen to what they sound like, just the raw recording. Sound great. Nothing wrong with that recording at all. However, in the song, we want them to poke out. We're adding a ton of bottom end. This EQ, again, you probably gathered that I love this EQ from Slate. The low end is massive, so we put that in. We can then balance it out with some top, because if we're adding that much low, we can afford to add some fizz and some poke on top. Let's drop this in. That instantly just sounds so much better. And again, this is a top and a bottom boost, and because this is modeled off analog EQs, Pultecs that have got a curve, that have got saturation and a sound to them, we would not get that same sound from simply taking a digital EQ and cutting the mids out. Let's take a listen to that again. I'm going to start with the EQ out, then I'll put the low boost in, then I'll put the high boost in. Let's take a listen. Those guitars just come out of the speakers just with those two very, very simple moves. But the point is that we're using additive EQ, using specific EQs that have a sound, and we're adding tone, we're adding flavor to it. Let's now just have a look at the vocals. So the lead vocal, this was recorded with a U47 through a Neve 1073 preamp into an LA2A compressor. Let's take a listen.
One more minute and I'll give my words to you. Right now, kill us forever. Don't know what we're doing, but it's now or never. All I need is you to pull me through. 'Cause you found a way to be my escape.
Sounds great. There's nothing wrong with that as a recording. However, we want it to poke out of the mix. It's going to need some compression because the dynamics are up and down. But it needs to be brighter. It's too dark. So the first thing that we're doing is adding EQ. Again, I love SSL for vocals. That's my starting point. So we have some 10K up top just for air, just for sheen, for brightness. We're also adding some the telephone frequencies just to make it stand out a little bit in that region, around 3K. And then just adding some body down in the low mids and the lows. Then going into this other EQ, I really, really like how 2K sounds on this. So again, just adding a little bit more of that. I could have added a little bit more of it here, but it was poking out a little bit too much for my taste, so that's why I've stacked the EQs. But then finally, we've got this one all over this mix, and just adding some of that gorgeous low end, a huge big chunk of it. It's going to make the vocal sound fat, it's going to make it sound in your face, and it just lifts it. So let's put all of that in. Let's see what it sounds like now.
Give me one night to change your mind. You say you don't know, I say don't ask why. I can't let you leave this behind.
Take it out.
'Cause I've been locked inside while you hold the key, and I've been trying to get out, but this might be the death of me.
Let's So that's not a subtle difference. And by using these different EQs for their different tones and different flavors, it just brings it to life. And I feel that you don't get that from using digital clean EQs and just scooping out the bits that you don't want. That's not a sound that I like. It's also a similar story on the mix bus. This track we're mixing into a compressor. We're also mixing into EQ as well. I love the sound of API EQs on the mix bus. It's adding some 10K air. We're also adding some low mids. And again, that sounds different to adding those same frequencies, same boosts on a Pultec or on an SSL or on a completely clean digital EQ. So the take-home message here is to not be afraid at all of boosting on EQs. Don't take to heart some of these messages about only ever using Subtractive EQ, because it's rubbish. As you can see on this mix, I've got certain instances where I'm putting huge EQ boosts, but because I've matched the EQ to the source and using it for a specific reason, this track came out sounding fantastic. It sounds great. It actually got played on Planet Rock, which was hosted by Joe Elliott. It's one of the biggest mainstream rock radio stations in the UK. Now, once your song is mixed and it's sounding epic, you're going to want to make sure that it's heard by as many people as possible. The reason that most artists fail with this is because they put the music out there, maybe a couple of posts on social media, and just hope for the best. I call this hope marketing, and this is a surefire way to make sure that your song does not get the recognition and the attention that it deserves. What you need is a fully mapped out, solid marketing plan so that you know what you're going to do ahead of time at every single stage to maximize your song's potential and to get it heard by as many people as possible. And to help with that, I created the ultimate marketing guide. This gives you the very best strategies that are working right now. Not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, because the landscape has changed dramatically since then. This is working right now to get artists tens of thousands of streams on Spotify, even within the first few weeks of release. It's helping artists get massive radio play, including on Planet Rock, on Absolute Country, and countless BBC stations up and down the UK. And it's even helped some artists that I've worked with get publishing deals as well. This guide is completely free, and the link is in the description below. Go check it out.